You never think your job will be the thing that kills you. It's just a paycheck, clock in, keep your head down, clock out. But sometimes the break room chatter hides darker truths. Sometimes the truck you're hauling wasn't meant to reach its destination. Sometimes the guy smiling across the stockroom isn't just creepy, he's dangerous. And sometimes the dead clock in for one more shift. These aren't just workplace horror stories, they're warnings, from haunted warehouses to creatures. Behind locked trailers, these are 5 true tales of ordinary jobs that turned into nightmarish survival stories. Welcome to your worst shift ever. Story 1. The Black Box Delivery. Back in the 80s, trucking wasn't just a job, it was a way of disappearing. You spent more time behind the wheel than in your own bed, learned to love the solitude, and if you had a family, well, they got used to missing you. I was 10 years deep into the life when this happened, moving everything from livestock to machinery across the country. At the time, I was working for one of the biggest chicken producers in the US. Not glamorous, but it paid the bills. My job was strictly transport. Pick up the load, drive it where it needed to go, no questions asked. It wasn't easy on the home life. My wife had been asking me for years to find something local, something that didn't keep me gone for 4 or 5 days at a time. I kept saying maybe soon, but the truth was, the money was hard to walk away from. I had just finished a brutal 4-day haul, taking chicken byproducts out to a disposal site in the next state over, and I was damn near shaking with anticipation to get home. I'd promised my wife dinner, real dinner, at a table, just the 2 of us, and I meant to keep it. I had just pulled up to the exit gate at the facility when I saw Bill, my boss, bursting through the front doors, waving his arms like a lunatic. I swear the temptation to hit the gas and leave him in the dust was strong. Bill was the kind of guy who didn't understand boundaries. He dumped that last job on me at the last minute, even though I'd been scheduled for time off. I put the rig in park and waited as he jogged over to my window. I didn't say a word, just knocked the ash off my cigarette onto his boots and stared him down. He looked irritated, but he went straight into his pitch, trying to smooth things over. "Thank God I caught you, Brad," he said. "This one's important, real urgent," I cut him off. "You better thank me for not running you over, Bill. I haven't seen my wife in weeks, and you're out here trying to reel me in for another job?" He tried to chuckle it off, said maybe I'd forgotten something, but he couldn't even hold the lie. He finally admitted it. Some urgent delivery. Mitchie wasn't answering, and the higher-ups needed someone reliable. I started the engine. "No way, not this time." Then he said the magic words, "There's a $1,000 bonus in it, cash, no taxes, straight from the boss's pocket." That made me pause. $1,000 in 80s money, that wasn't chump change, and things had been tight lately. I sighed, cursed under my breath, and said, "Call my wife. Tell her I won't be home tonight." Bill smiled like he'd just won the lottery. "It's going to an old warehouse shut down 4 years ago. Just storage now. It's a 3-day drive." I groaned. "Let's load the damn thing. The sooner we start, the sooner I get my life back." I didn't even look at what they were loading into my trailer at first. I just wanted to get moving, get this over with. But then I noticed the guys on the dock weren't acting normal. They weren't laughing or goofing around like usual. One guy stood stiff with his arms crossed. Another kept glancing nervously at the box being lifted by the forklift. And when I say box, I don't mean some crate of frozen drumsticks. This thing looked custom built. Thick, matte black metal, solid as a vault, with tiny ventilation holes no bigger than a fingertip scattered along the top and sides. It reminded me of a pet carrier, if the pet was something they didn't want. Getting out. I stepped out of the cab and approached, narrowing my eyes. "What the hell am I hauling?" I asked. Bill was standing a good 20 feet away, sweating bullets despite the cool air. "Can't say," he muttered. "But it's nothing illegal." That didn't comfort me one bit. I'd hauled chickens before, usually in flimsy cages stacked like dominoes, but this thing was serious, reinforced, heavy enough to make the forklift groan and creak under its weight. Some of the loaders even backed away once it was in place. The whole setup made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Before I could climb back in, Bill came over and grabbed my arm hard, harder than I expected from him. He pulled me close like he was trying to whisper something he didn't want the others to hear. "Don't open the trailer, Brad," he said, eyes darting left and right. "Whatever you think you hear in there, just keep driving, you hear me? Don't stop, don't check it, don't look." I was about to laugh in his face, but something in his voice, the way it cracked on the last word, froze me up. He looked scared, genuinely scared. I drove for a few hours before calling it a night. Stopped at a little gas station I knew just outside our home base. Familiar spot. Had showers, decent coffee. I secured the truck, double-checked the locks on the trailer, then headed inside to rinse off the road. As I walked back out passing the trailer, I heard something. A faint, clicking sound. Not mechanical, not the usual pops and ticks a truck makes after a long drive. It was rhythmic, like someone clicking their tongue, slow and deliberate. I froze and placed my hand against the metal. The sound vibrated through the wall into my palm. The locks were all intact, no signs of tampering, and the yard was empty. But that sound, low, almost mocking, echoed in my chest in a way that set my teeth on edge. Still, I told myself it was just the box settling, maybe something shifting inside. I went to bed. It stopped sometime during the night, just stopped. In the morning I debated calling Bill, but I figured he wouldn't have answers. Still, I left him a voicemail from the payphone outside. "Hey Bill," I said, trying to sound casual. "Whatever y'all got me moving is making weird noises. If this thing's a bomb or something, I think it's a dud. Clicked a bunch last night, but it's quiet now. Anyway, call me back. Seriously." He didn't call back, and I had no idea the worst was still ahead. 12 hours into the next leg of the trip, I found myself deep in the Appalachian foothills. The roads narrowed into twisting bands of asphalt barely wide enough for 2 cars, and the climbs were brutal. I'd done this route plenty of times before, but even seasoned drivers feel their stomachs twist on those blind turns. Around the 9th hour, as the sun began to sink behind the ridges, I came up on a curve where visibility dropped to nothing. And that's when the Impala appeared, an old black 70s model, blasting around the corner on the wrong side of the road. I slammed the brakes so hard my chest collided with the steering wheel. Horn blaring, tires screaming, rubber burning. The rig groaned in protest as the trailer rocked violently behind me. Smoke clouded the air. The Impala missed me by inches, its tail end nearly clipping the trailer as it disappeared down the mountain road like a bat out of hell. My heart was pounding so loud I didn't even notice the sound at first. But there it was again, that clicking. Only, now it was louder, faster, like dozens of bones snapping in sequence. I climbed out of the cab, coughing from the acrid smoke, and staggered back toward the trailer. It was vibrating, not shaking from the road, not twitching from uneven weight, but thrumming like something inside was moving. I reached out and touched the side. The metal dented inward with a new bulge, sharp and pointed like the impact of a battering ram, and there were several of them. Indentations that hadn't been there yesterday clustered together like claws trying to punch their way out. I snapped, cursing Bill, cursing myself. I yanked the keys from the ignition and stormed to the back, grabbing my flashlight from beneath the seat. My collarbone still ached from years of hard labor, and my breath fogged the cool mountain air as I fumbled with the trailer lock. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from something else. That primal fear you get when your instincts scream that you're doing something very, very wrong. The padlock clicked open with a snap that felt too loud. I opened the doors wide, and for a moment everything went still. No sound, no wind. Even the forest around me hushed. The flashlight beam cut into the darkness, revealing the black crate, toppled onto its side. The locks were still hanging, off it untouched, but the top panel had been ripped open from the inside. That wasn't just pried or bent, it looked torn. Heavy metal peeled back like a tin can, and scattered around it were feathers. Not chicken feathers. These were massive, patterned like a hawk's, and the size of my damn forearm. They shimmered with an unnatural sheen, oily and wrong. Then I saw them. Eyes. 4 of them glowing faintly in the dark recesses of the trailer. 2 lower ones, pale green like moss in a dying pond. 2 higher, deep blue like ocean trench water. And all 4 locked onto me. The clicking returned, slow and deliberate, reverberating through the trailer's frame. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The thing lowered itself, revealing a hunched, powerful shape, muscles rippling under matted fur or feathers. I couldn't tell what it was. It stepped forward once, and I felt it in my chest. The pupils in those eyes contracted into pinholes, like tiny black holes, and then it charged. I slammed the doors shut just as it collided with them. The impact sent me flying backward off the ramp, crashing hard onto the gravel. A sharp pain exploded through my side. My collarbone snapped. I knew it immediately. I gasped, scrambled upright, and reached for the lock. The doors bulged outward. With every hit, the metal groaned. The latch trembled. Another hit, and the trailer rocked on its axles. Screaming through clenched teeth, I slammed the lock down, snapping it shut. The creature inside shrieked, low and guttural, and rammed once more, then again, and finally silence. The trailer stopped shaking. No more clicking, just my own ragged breathing and the unbearable pounding of my heart. And I knew then. I'd made a huge mistake, one I wasn't sure I could outrun. I drove like a man possessed. My shoulder was screaming, my collarbone grinding with every bump, but I didn't care. I kept one eye on the mirrors, half expecting to see those 4 eyes staring back through the seams of the trailer. For 2 solid hours I floored it, ignoring the speed limits, ignoring the pain, chasing the sunrise like it was my only way out. Somewhere along the way I passed a state trooper. He didn't even flash his lights. I don't know if Bill pulled strings or if the trailer itself gave off the kind of don't ask questions energy that made people look away. When I finally reached the warehouse, I wasn't greeted with open arms. It was a grim, remote lot surrounded by pine trees and silence. The gates were open, but every door and window on the building was bolted shut, covered in rust and warning signs. 3 black sedans were parked off to the side, and a group of men waited near the loading dock. 4 of them, dressed in full tactical gear, Kevlar vests and dark helmets. They didn't speak, didn't ask what happened, just watched as I backed the trailer into place, my hands trembling on the wheel. One man stepped forward as I finished unhooking the rig. He was built like the others, but his clothes underneath. The armor looked more expensive, like he belonged in an office, not a gunfight. Without a word, he handed me a thick wad of cash, way more than $1,000. "For your trouble," he said flatly. "Best not to talk about this. Got it?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but something about his tone, his cold, dead certainty, snapped my jaw shut. I nodded. "Got it." He gave me one last look and said, "Go home to your wife and son." I turned and climbed back into the cab. As I drove away, the gunfire started, loud, precise, automatic bursts echoing through the trees. Then, all at once, it stopped. Silence swallowed the forest. I never looked back. I quit that job that same day. I used a payphone to call Bill and told him I was done. He didn't argue, he just said he understood, and that he'd vouch for me if I ever needed a reference. He never said thank you. Story 2. The Register That Never Closed. I've never been one to jump at shadows, but I'd be lying if I said working in retail didn't wear you down in weird ways, especially when you're the one stuck closing. I spent several years working in a big box store just outside of a small, supposedly haunted city, something the locals liked to brag about, but no one really took seriously. Not until you worked the night shift, that is. The hours were long, the pay was a joke, and the public was, well, exactly what you'd expect. But what really made the place memorable wasn't the screaming customers or the never-ending cleanup. It was the ghost stories. There was this plaque mounted on the wall in the back loading area, a little metal memorial with a name, a date, and a short, in loving memory message. The first time I saw it, I didn't think much of it. Every workplace has its share of bad history. But as time went on, I started hearing different versions of what happened to the person it honored. Some said it was a tragic accident with the pallet jacks. Others whispered that it had been suicide, jumped from the storage mezzanine, or hung himself in the break room bathroom, depending on who you asked. Nobody seemed to know for sure, but everybody had a version they swore was true. It was one of those things that got passed down to every new hire, usually by the stock guys who worked the late shift, a rite of passage kind of thing. If you're working near the cafe alone, they'd say, don't be surprised if you see someone walking around after hours. You'd laugh it off at first, roll your eyes, tell yourself it was just part of the local law, and maybe that's all it was. But something about that building, about that one part of the store felt off. I usually worked doubles, covering both the morning setup and the evening, close on weekends, when management didn't want to pay two people. That meant I was often left alone in the late hours, especially in the customer cafe area, which by then had become a quiet, dimly lit corner of the store. Just me, the smell of old fryer grease, and the humming of overhead fluorescents. Most nights were uneventful, just long and boring, but there was always this presence, like someone was nearby watching through the tiny windows in the kitchen doors. I brushed it off for the longest time, lack of sleep, overwork, imagination. But after a while, the feeling stopped being subtle. And then one night, I saw something that made me realize the stories weren't just stories. It happened on a Wednesday night. Not that the day mattered much when every shift blurred into the next. The store was mostly empty, and the cafe was down to its final hour of service. The other closer on shift, a girl named S, had been working, without a break for hours, so I told her to go take hers while I held down the fort. I didn't mind. Truth be told, I liked the quiet, especially after a day full of complaints and impatient customers. The layout of the cafe was awkward. Picture an L shape with a narrow corridor forming the bend, two kitchen doors about 3 feet apart, one for entry, one for exit. Both had those little rectangular windows, just wide enough to catch movement, but too small to see clearly. The new prep and cooking area sat behind them, blocked from view unless you were inside. I was wiping down the register counter when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A figure standing in the kitchen just behind the entry door. I popped, up thinking S had come back early, and casually made my way around to greet her. "Hey," I called out, pushing open the door with my back. "You should have let me know you were back. I'd have made us coffee." But the kitchen was empty. I stood there for a second, blinking at the silence. The lights above flickered, once then steadied. My gut told me I wasn't alone, even though my eyes told me otherwise. I called out again. Nothing, no response. I poked my head back through the door to check the customer area in case she'd slipped past me. Still nothing. Maybe it was a trick of the light, I told myself, shadows playing on stainless steel. I tried to shake it off, returned to cleaning. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. That figure, still as stone, watching me from the kitchen. I could picture it exactly. Not just where it had stood, but how it had turned left and walked out of sight before I followed it. That wasn't the only time either. A few nights later, I was restocking the drinks fridge just before closing when I felt it again. Someone behind me. I stood up quickly, but no one was there. Just that same uneasy feeling prickling the back of my neck. I glanced toward the kitchen windows. Nothing, but I could have sworn, just for a moment, something had been looking back. I tried telling S about it the next day. She looked at me strangely and asked if I'd been working too much. Maybe I had. But then she paused and said something that made my skin crawl. "You know, a customer asked me the other night why I kept disappearing into the kitchen. Said he saw me walk in there like 10 minutes before I came back. But I was in the lobby the whole time." Neither of us said much after that. Still, we weren't the only ones. Another employee mentioned hearing the fryer kick on late at night when the kitchen was empty. Someone else swore they saw someone in a red apron standing near the coffee machine, only no one wears red aprons anymore. They were phased out years ago. It was like something or someone was still clocking in, still doing the job they died doing, over and over again, and whatever it was, it had started noticing us back. The night it came to a head, I was closing alone again. It wasn't supposed to be that way, but S had called out sick and management didn't bother finding coverage. So it was just me, one employee, one open cafe, and a hell of a lot of fluorescent. The store was dead quiet, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel amplified. The ice machine dropping cubes sounded like gunfire. My own footsteps echoed back at me from the tile floors. I kept my earbuds in, low enough to hear if anyone came in, and tried not to look too long at the dark corners of the cafe. I was halfway through wiping down the prep counter when I heard the kitchen door creak open behind me. Now, let me be clear. Those doors are heavy. They don't just swing open on their own. I turned expecting to see a manager or maybe a lost customer wandering in from the front, but there was no one. The door was open just an inch, like someone had nudged it and stopped. I stared at it for a moment, my pulse picking up, and then walked over to push it shut. But as I reached for the handle, I saw movement through the window. Not fast, not dramatic, just a slow shift, like someone ducking out of view. I stood frozen, staring into that tiny rectangle of glass, heart in my throat. Then I heard it, a soft sound barely audible, but it hit me like a gunshot. It was my name, not shouted, not whispered exactly, just spoken, like someone trying to get your attention. From across the room, "Hey!" I staggered back, slamming into the prep table behind me. My apron snagged on a drawer, yanking me sideways as I tried to regain balance. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe a customer had slipped in. But deep down I knew better. That voice wasn't coming from someone on this side of the kitchen. It was coming from inside. I ripped off my apron and threw open the door, determined to catch whoever was messing with me. But the kitchen was empty. Every station was clean. The back hallway, locked. No sound. No one. Just the faint smell of burned oil and something else, like damp clothes. Or mildew. I backed up, breath shallow, and turned toward the far wall where the fire escape door was, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. Not a vague one. Not the kind you convince yourself was just a trick of the light. This one had shape. Shoulders, a head, arms. It was cast along the far wall of the kitchen, but there was no body attached, no source. It didn't move like a normal shadow either. It drifted, slow and deliberate, crawling across the surface like it was hunting for a place to disappear into. And as I watched, paralyzed, it thickened, darkened, took on depth. It was walking. I don't know how long I stood there, rooted to the spot, but the next thing I knew, the exit door flew open and S walked in, mid-apology to a customer who had asked her where I'd gone. She trailed off the second she saw my face. "Are you okay?" she asked. I couldn't answer. I just walked past her, out into the customer area, grabbed my jacket and left without clocking out. I didn't say a word the whole way home. After that night, I avoided the cafe whenever I could. I still saw the figure a few more times, always just out of view, always gone the second I looked full on. But the fear was never as strong as it was that night, that moment, that voice. I'd heard stories about spirits stuck in loops, replaying the moments before they died. I used to think it was just spooky nonsense people told for fun, but I'm not so sure anymore. I never officially reported what I saw. Who would I tell? Management barely responded to theft reports, let alone claims of a shadow figure whispering names in the dark. I kept my head down, finished my shifts, and quietly requested to be reassigned. Away from the cafe area, they didn't ask questions. Maybe I wasn't the first. Over time, the memory dulled but never fully disappeared. Every once in a while, someone new would bring it up. Have you heard the stories? They'd ask during a slow shift. About the guy who died here? And I'd nod, pretending to be as skeptical as everyone else, even as a part of me tightened. At the mention, the plaque in the back stayed up, untouched, as if no one dared take it down. Like removing it might invite something back. What unsettled me most wasn't the fear, but the routine of it. The way the figure moved through the kitchen, like it had a purpose, like it belonged. I started to believe it wasn't just haunting the space, it was still working. Still wiping counters, still checking fryers, still watching over the register, like it never got the chance to finish the shift it started. I left the job a few months later. Not because of the ghost, at least that's what I told myself, but because I needed a change. A new job, a new schedule, something far from that cafe. But even now, whenever I pass by the store as a customer, I don't go near that side. I avoid the kitchen doors. I avoid the hallway leading to the fire escape, because even though the building feels different now, renovated, cleaner, brighter, I can still feel it. That heaviness, that presence, that moment when the air shifts and you know you're not alone. People like to joke about workplace ghosts. They make memes and TikToks about haunted offices and creepy back rooms, but sometimes the scariest spirits aren't angry or violent. Sometimes they're just stuck, caught in the same loop, wearing the same uniform, forever waiting to clock out, and if you're unlucky enough to work their shift, they might just mistake you for the one who's out of place. Story 3. Blood in Greenwell Woods. Road work is a dirty, brutal job. People don't think about it much, just complain when there's a delay or detour. But they don't see what happens before the orange cones go up. I'm a surveyor. That means I walk through places most people never would. Rough terrain, dense woods, swampy stretches of land where bugs treat you like a buffet. You get used to the cold mornings, the mud in your boots and the constant damp that settles into your bones. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared us for the forest near Greenwell. It was midsummer when we got the contract. We were just a few weeks away from our scheduled break, and the guys were already dreaming about cold beer and warm sand. But this job had to be done first. Cut a path through the woods for a new access road. It paid double the usual rate, which should have been the first red flag. I'd been in this line of work long enough to know that double pay usually meant danger, or at the very least, a lot of bureaucratic headaches. But none of us were in the mood to say no. The team was solid, 6 of us in total. Old Tom was the veteran, a lifer who'd been doing this work since before GPS was a thing. He had a thick white beard, a busted shoulder, and a scar that ran down his cheek from a job decades ago when a tree fell the wrong way. The way he told it, the tree took 2 good men and half my face. I'm just here to finish the job they didn't get to. Then there was Dean, the Joker, always ready with a dumb pun or bad impersonation to keep spirits up. Lawrence was our unofficial trivia machine. He'd show up every morning with a new did you know fact. Jonathan kept to himself, but he was dependable. And Samuel, well, everyone called him Mr. Grumpy. He always had a complaint loaded up. But he worked harder than most people I've met. We all got along, no drama, no nonsense, just good men trying to get the job done. But when we told locals what forest we were surveying, their faces would go pale. Some said it was haunted. Others muttered about strange things in the trees, but the most common whispers were about disappearances and werewolves. Yeah, I know. Sounds ridiculous. But enough people said it with that same haunted tone that it stuck in my head. Tom just laughed when I brought it up. I've seen a lot in these woods, son, never seen a werewolf. Then he added after a pause, but that doesn't mean there's nothing out there. The next morning we entered Greenwell forest just after sunrise. The light barely made it through the canopy, and the air was thick and still. I didn't say it out loud, but something about the place felt wrong from the very first step. The first 2 days passed with nothing but mud and mosquitoes. We mapped out elevation markers, tied survey ribbons to trees, and used chainsaws to clear minor brush. The deeper we pushed into Greenwell forest, the less it felt like a job and more like we were intruding. The air got colder even though it was the middle of July, and the sunlight barely filtered through the dense canopy. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that made your ears strain for sound, the kind that feels like a held breath. Dean tried to keep us light-hearted, cracking jokes and tossing twigs at our boots when our backs were turned. "Come. On, ladies," he'd shout. "This road won't build itself." We chuckled, but it always felt a little forced, because something about that place, it didn't want us there. I started seeing things in the corners of my vision, flickers of motion that disappeared when I turned my head. Once or twice I thought I saw shapes, tall, narrow figures between the trees. But when I'd stop and stare, it was just forest. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. But I wasn't the only one. On day 3, as we were moving deeper into the east sector, Jonathan suddenly stopped and rubbed the back of his neck. "Feels like we're being watched," he muttered. I looked up from my map. "You too?" He gave a single nod. Dean shrugged it off, saying it was probably deer. "Or squirrels planning a coup," he grinned, but his eyes were restless. That was the first time I noticed it. He wasn't really joking anymore. Not the same way. Then we found the claw marks. It was Lawrence who spotted them. Deep gouges carved into the trunk of a large oak, slashing diagonally like something had swiped across it with massive force. But it wasn't just the depth. It was what coated the grooves. A dark red substance, thick and slightly glossy. It looked like blood, but when someone asked, Tom immediately cut in, "It's tree sap. Old stuff. Nothing to worry about." But we could all tell by the look on his face he didn't believe it. The next day we came across more signs. Twigs cracked in strange patterns around us, circling us as we worked. We saw more claw marks, all too deep and too high up to be from any animal native to the area. The forest began to feel tighter, like the trees were inching closer behind our backs. At night we heard howling, not coyote howls, not those high echoing cries. This was something deeper, throaty, long. It carried through the trees and into our bones. Samuel, who had been grumbling since day 1, suddenly went quiet. He stopped complaining, stopped talking. That was when I knew it was serious. By day 6, we began finding carcasses. First it was a rabbit, then a fox, then a wild boar. All of them mutilated, guts torn out, limbs twisted unnaturally. But what got us most were the wounds. Each animal had the same distinct gashes, identical to the claw marks we'd seen on the trees. Old Tom, who'd been through more than any of us, just stared at one of the bodies for a long time without saying a word. Then he turned to us and said, "Mark everything fast. We finish by tomorrow, no matter what." None of us argued, because by then the forest wasn't just eerie anymore. It was watching us. And whatever was behind those trees wasn't done yet. It happened on the 8th day. We were supposed to be done by then, but the terrain had slowed us down. That afternoon we were still marking measurements deep in the eastern section, an area thick with gnarled oaks and underbrush, so dense it swallowed your boots. The sun had already dipped behind the tree line, leaving only a dim golden bleed through the branches. We should have packed up, but Tom insisted on finishing one last marker. "One more line," he said, "then we're done for good." I think part of him just wanted it over with. Like the rest of us, he could feel the pressure in the air, like something was waiting for us to make one wrong move. Then we heard the scream. It wasn't an animal cry. It was human, high, pained, and filled with panic. It echoed through the trees and sent every one of us stiff with fear. "Tom," Lawrence called out. There was no answer, only rustling, somewhere far off, like someone being dragged through brush. Then another scream, closer this time. "Help me!" It was Tom's voice, but it didn't sound right. It was warbled as if coming from underwater, or from something trying to imitate him. We bolted, flares in hand, flashlights cutting wild. Beams through the thick woods, we ran toward the noise, but every time we thought we were getting close, it shifted, moved farther left, then farther right, then behind us somehow. Like whatever had Tom was playing with us. Dean shouted his name into the trees, voice cracking. I kept scanning with the light, desperate to catch any sign of him, of anything, but all we saw were trees and shadows, and then silence. Just like that. Everything stopped. The wind, the rustling, even the crickets. The forest went dead quiet, and that was somehow worse than the screams. We stood there, gasping, sweating and shaking, trying to process the stillness. Then a sound broke the silence. A low, wet crunch. Like bones breaking under pressure. But it wasn't just one snap, it was rhythmic, like chewing. Slow and deliberate. Dean backed up into me and whispered, "That's not a bear." We didn't find Tom. Not that night. We called the police, but they told us to wait until morning before a search could begin. Too dangerous at night, they said. We tried to argue, but it was useless. We returned to camp, barely slept, and when dawn broke, we joined the search party. They brought dogs, big, serious K9 units, but the moment we reached the forest's edge, they froze, whined, refused to go in. One officer muttered, "They've never done that before." Eventually, they coaxed the dogs forward, and not long after, they found him, or what was left of him. Old Tom was everywhere. Bits of clothing, tatters of flesh, his equipment bag shredded like paper. But what chilled us to the marrow were the claw marks, carved deep into the tree bark nearby and into Tom's remains. They were massive, symmetrical, and familiar. They matched exactly what we'd seen on the trees and the animals. The police blamed a bear, maybe two, but bears don't mutilate like that. They don't rip people apart and scatter the pieces like trophies, and they sure as hell don't move, silently through thick woods while imitating human voices. We knew better. We all did. That night, back at the hotel, I sat with Jonathan in the parking lot, passing a cigarette between us. "You still think those were just stories?" I asked. He exhaled slow and shook his head. "No," he said. "I think there's something out here. And I think it's been out here a long time." We didn't say much after that, but we both agreed on one thing. We weren't staying. We didn't go back after that. The company brought in a different crew to finish the job, locals who were paid triple and worked in broad daylight only, under armed supervision. They poured concrete, laid gravel, and got the road done in record time. But none of us, not me, not Dean, not Lawrence or Jonathan, ever set foot in Greenwell Forest again. Samuel quit entirely, moved out of state with his wife. Said he couldn't sleep with woods nearby. I didn't blame him. They held a small memorial for old Tom, but no one really knew what to say. The man had outlived dozens of dangerous jobs, lost friends to accidents, nearly died under falling trees, and yet this, torn apart by something we couldn't name, something we barely even saw. It didn't feel real, but it was. And sometimes when I think too hard about those final moments, the scream, the silence, that wet cracking noise, I wish it wasn't. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had let us leave on purpose, like we weren't prey, just trespassers being warned. Maybe Tom had been the price of our ignorance. Maybe we only survived because it chose to let us. Or maybe we were just lucky, but I don't believe in luck anymore. One night after it was all over, I was talking with Jonathan again, this time in the back of a diner where we used to grab coffee before shifts. He looked tired, hollow. I asked him if he still thought it was a werewolf. He hesitated for a long moment, then said, "I don't know what it was, but there are millions of acres of forest in this country, and we've only seen a fraction. Don't you think something else might be out there?" I didn't answer, because I'd already started sleeping with a silver knife under my pillow just in case. Story 4. The Walk Between the Racks. I've worked all kinds of jobs in my life, but nothing messes with your head quite like the graveyard shift in an empty warehouse. The place I work now builds parts for cars, mass production, long hours, heavy machinery, and more concrete and metal than anything that should feel human. It's not a bad gig, all things considered. The pay's solid, the benefits are decent, and most days it's just about getting through the shift and meeting your quota. But once we moved into the new warehouse down the road, something about the atmosphere changed. At night especially, it stopped feeling like a workplace and started feeling like something else entirely. The new building is massive, easily the size of a football field, but our department only occupies one tiny section in the far corner, tucked away near the loading bay. To save energy, management decided only that corner gets lit during the night shift. The rest of the warehouse stays completely dark. No emergency. Lights, no motion sensors, just a sea of shadows stretching in every direction. Picture it, 3 people working under buzzing fluorescent bulbs, while the rest of the world around you vanishes into silence and pitch black. It's enough to make you start hearing things, even if you weren't the paranoid type. At first it was fine. I worked with my boyfriend and a guy named B who ran the forklift. Most nights we wore earbuds, listened to podcasts or music, and focused on getting through our 12-hour shifts. If you stayed busy, time passed quickly, but there were nights when the quiet sank into your bones, when you'd catch a glimpse of something in your peripheral vision and turn to find nothing there. Nights when the silence wasn't empty, it was loaded, waiting. In the second year I worked there, things began to change. It started small. Faint footsteps on the concrete when no one was walking, tools being found out of place, machinery kicking on by itself. We wrote it off as fatigue, stress, maybe faulty wiring. We were working long hours, sometimes 7 days, a week. Of course we were tired, but then we saw him. It happened one night when we were short-staffed. B and I were going over paperwork while my boyfriend walked across the warehouse to the bathroom. He took his phone flashlight, disappeared around the corner, and left us chatting about weekend plans. And then, just like that, someone walked up behind us. An older man, calm, wearing the company shirt. He smiled, nodded, and said, "I'm just passing through." Then he turned and walked into the shadows toward the break room and the bathrooms. But when my boyfriend came back 10 minutes later, he hadn't seen anyone. And B and I realized, looking at each other with a kind of cold dread, that we didn't recognize that man at all. We saw the man, everything changed. At first, B and I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was from another department, maybe a day shifter who got stuck late, maybe a supervisor we hadn't met. But none of that made sense. He didn't ask for anything, didn't seem to be looking for someone, just passed through like he belonged. And yet neither of us had ever seen him before, and there was something off about the way he moved. Too smooth, too quiet, like his feet barely touched the ground. Later that same night, my boyfriend came back from the vending machines completely unaware of what we'd seen. He handed me a drink and a handful of candy with a big smile like nothing had happened. We didn't want to scare him, so we kept it to ourselves. We went back to work, trying to focus on the repetition of motion, weld, stack, move. But the EDI shadows pressing in around the lit section of the warehouse felt heavier than usual, like they were creeping closer every time we blinked. Just before break, I told the guys I needed to run to the restroom. The bathrooms and break room were at the far end of the building, down a long aisle flanked by empty metal racks that stretched toward the darkness. I walked fast, not wanting to admit I was spooked. Inside the women's restroom, I headed for the stall closest to the door, and that's when I heard it. A voice, it was low, almost a whisper, but definitely male. It came from the last stall at the far end. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm, like someone talking softly to themselves. I froze. There shouldn't have been anyone in there. No other women were on shift, and the only men were B and my boyfriend, both still working. I backed out without even locking the stall door, heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I ran back to the break room and told the guys what I heard. Without hesitation, both of them rushed into the women's bathroom. B even drew out a metal pipe we kept near the forklift station just in case, but they came back a minute later, both pale and confused. "No one's there," my boyfriend said, his eyes scanning the room like he expected someone to still be hiding nearby. We sat close together during break, the vending machine humming in the corner as the only sound. I kept glancing toward the dark hallway leading to the bathroom, afraid the man we saw earlier would stroll back through, smiling that same strange smile. When it was time to return to work, I didn't want to leave the bright break room. It had started to feel like a safe zone, a tiny island of light in a sea of darkness that now felt alive. B had to convince me to walk back, promising to keep the forklift nearby, engine on, just in case. And as we headed back through the aisle between the racks, I made the mistake of turning around. Just for a second, there were footsteps. But no. One behind us. And a second later, B's phone buzzed with a message from my boyfriend. He was at the gas station. The moment B read the text from my boyfriend, his expression changed. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at his phone, then back at the dark path behind us. "He's at the gas station," he finally muttered, voice low, like saying it any louder might invite something closer. My stomach dropped. The footsteps we heard a few seconds earlier hadn't been echoes, and now we knew they didn't belong to any of us. We weren't alone. That truth settled over me like ice water, and I instinctively reached for B's arm. Without a word, we both started walking faster, practically speed walking back toward the lit section of the warehouse, our ears straining for any new sound. And then, just before we reached the edge of the light, I heard it. That dragging step. Not hurried, not clumsy, just steady, confident, like whoever or whatever it was didn't need to rush. It knew we wouldn't go far. We spun around at the same time, but there was nothing there. Just row after row of silent, shelves vanishing into pitch black. I wanted to believe it was just nerves, maybe the sound of the building settling or the echoes of our own footsteps. But then B pointed to the far end of the aisle, a shadow. It moved. We didn't see it clearly, not at first, but something broke the line of sight, like a person stepping just out of view. But what chilled me wasn't the motion. It was the fact that the overhead light flickered the moment it passed under it, as if whatever had moved there bent more than just shadow. We didn't run, we sprinted. We made it back to the main work zone, and I grabbed my boyfriend's hoodie off the back of his chair like it was a shield. The machinery around us hummed like nothing was wrong, but every instinct in my body told me something was very, very wrong. We called our supervisor from the main building. He arrived 15 minutes later, a giant of a man built like a linebacker, who always acted like nothing scared him. But even he looked uneasy when we told him what happened. He did a sweep with B and my boyfriend, who'd just returned from the gas station, and found nothing. No signs of anyone, no break-in, no misplaced equipment, just cold air and empty aisles. Still, the supervisor agreed to stay with us for the rest of the night. He posted up near the lit section with his tablet, watching us while we worked, trying to pretend everything was normal. But it wasn't. We all felt it. The space just outside the fluorescent lighting felt like it was pulsing, watching. More than once, we heard something scrape against metal in the distance. More than once, we turned to look and saw racks swaying, ever so slightly, chains swinging like someone had just walked past. At one point, even our supervisor stood up suddenly and looked over his shoulder, eyes narrowed. "Did you hear that?" he asked. We all nodded, but none of us moved. None of us went to check. We just stayed in the light, heads down, pretending to be busy until the first rays of sun began to creep in through the high warehouse windows. The light didn't bring comfort, it just brought relief. The kind that makes your muscles ache all at once when adrenaline finally drains out of your system. I didn't even wait for the final bell to ring. I practically ran to the bathroom, desperate to pee after holding it in all night, but also just to finally be alone in a room with a lock. When I came back out, B, my boyfriend, and the supervisor were all standing together, pale-faced. The supervisor cleared his throat and said, "I just got a call. John, one of our co-workers, he died in a car accident last night, just before midnight." That's when it hit me. The man we'd seen, he wasn't lost, he was already dead. After the supervisor told us about John's death, none of us spoke for a long time. We just stood there staring at each other, trying to process the impossible. He and his wife had been hit by a drunk driver on their way home, only a few miles from the warehouse. John died on impact, his wife barely survived. The crash had happened around the same time we saw the man in the company shirt. The man who smiled and told us he was just passing through. The man who walked calmly into the dark toward the break room and the bathrooms, right where John used to eat his midnight meals. We later learned something that chilled us even more. The drunk driver who killed John also worked at our company. Second shift shipping department. He died on impact too. 2 men died that night. One we all knew and respected. The other, maybe not so much. But somehow one of them, or both, had shown up during our shift. For what reason, I'll never know. I've replayed that night more times than I care to admit. Sometimes I wonder if the man we saw was John, confused, trying to find familiar ground before moving on. Other times, I wonder if it was the other. One, the drunk driver wandering in shock, not realizing he'd already passed. Or worse, fully aware and just looking for someone to notice him. To this day, I still work at that warehouse. But we've changed a few things. We keep more lights on at night. We no longer walk alone through the unlit sections. And I don't use the bathroom on that side of the building unless it's absolutely necessary. John's wife survived, and after weeks in the ICU, she recovered. Their children are okay, living with her sister now. Life has moved on, as it always does. But some nights when the building goes quiet and the shadows stretch just a little too long, I swear I still hear footsteps coming down the aisle, and when I do, I stop whatever I'm doing and wait for them to pass. Story 5. The Smile Behind the Stockroom. The summer after I finished high school was supposed to be easy, just a few months of part-time work before heading off to university. I landed a job at a trendy fashion retailer in the city center. It was decent money for someone my age, and the work was mindless enough not to drain me completely. I liked the early shifts, the ones that started before the mall even opened. You could move freely, joke with co-workers while unpacking boxes, and enjoy a kind of peaceful buzz that came with being productive before the world woke up. It was comfortable, familiar. That is, until Aaron started. I didn't need the manager's introduction when she brought him into the stockroom one bright Monday morning. I already knew who he was. He'd transferred to our high school a couple of years back, and while most of my friends adored him, I never fully trusted the guy. There was something too perfect about him, too charming, too polished, always smiling, always saying the right thing. But if you caught him when he thought no one was looking, that smile would disappear, and what replaced it felt off, cold, like his face remembered how to mimic joy but not how to feel it. Still, we were just kids then, and I figured I'd been overthinking it. So when the manager asked me to train him, I just smiled, gripped the cart handle a little tighter, and nodded. "Hey, wow, it's really good to see a familiar face," he said, stepping in for a hug. I tensed, pretending to be caught off guard by the boxes in my hands, sidestepping just enough to keep the distance. "Crazy to run into you here," I said with a light laugh, forcing myself into work mode. "Why don't you grab that box and follow me?" The stockroom was already bustling, coats slung over ladders, radio playing low in the background, co-workers tagging and sorting piles of new arrivals. I set him up with the shoes first, the easiest task, something to keep his hands busy while I got through my usual routine. Everything seemed normal, mundane. We fell into a rhythm, tagging, sorting, moving hangers from one rack to another. Eventually, Aaron started helping with the women's section, including the lingerie line. That was when he began to talk more. First about public transport, then about university, then pets. And just like in high school, he said the right things. But that feeling I remembered, that quiet pressure behind the smile, started crawling back. At first, our conversations were harmless, small talk really. Aaron chatted with me and another co-worker, Maggie, while we sorted through endless racks of new inventory. He talked about the city, how he hated the transit delays, how he was excited for university. Normal stuff. But I never quite let my guard down. His energy was off, too cheerful, too eager, like he was performing happiness more than living it. Then the conversation drifted to pets and something shifted. I just finished telling Maggie about my cat, Georgie, a short-haired tabby with a cranky streak. Maggie laughed and showed off a picture of her dog on her phone. That's when Aaron, who had been unusually quiet during our pet banter, muttered, "I hate when my boyfriend's parrot starts screeching. That thing's so annoying." His tone was flat, not exasperated, cold. "Sometimes I wish I could just strangle her. But Brandon would hate me for it." He said it with a smirk, like he was trying to make a joke. But it didn't land. Maggie and I exchanged a glance, that awkward kind of eye contact you make when someone's crossed a line. He either didn't notice or didn't care. He kept tagging clothing while muttering, almost to himself. Stupid little thing, always yapping. I caught phrases like "needs a muzzle," and some animals don't learn unless you teach them. The room felt smaller after that. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed harsher, casting pale shadows over Aaron's smiling face as he continued working like nothing was wrong. Maggie drifted to another table after that. I stayed where I was, trying to keep the conversation light, steering it away from anything personal. But the tension lingered, heavy, unspoken, charged. Aaron started showing up to shifts early. He always managed to position himself close to me, like gravity kept pulling him in my direction. He didn't do anything overtly inappropriate. He was too smart for that. Instead, it was the way he stood just a little too close, how he watched people when they weren't looking, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. And once, I caught him staring at one of the mannequins on the sales floor, his head tilted slightly, like he was imagining something I didn't want to understand. I remembered how I used to feel around him back in school, that gut-deep discomfort. I had always chalked it up to intuition, maybe even unfair judgment. But now, with his offhand threats and that strange look in his eyes, I realized I had been right to be uneasy. Still, I didn't say anything. What could I say? That I didn't like the way he laughed when no one else was laughing. That something about his presence made the back of my neck itch. Retail is full of weirdos. You learn to brush things off, but the difference was, Aaron wasn't weird. He was wrong. The unraveling didn't come with screaming or sirens. It arrived quietly, like rot beneath floorboards. I showed up for my afternoon shift, expecting nothing more than gossip about annoying customers or someone calling in sick. Instead, I walked into a staff room that felt like it had been drained of all sound. Every conversation died as I stepped through the door. People were huddled together, faces pale, eyes wide. I spotted Maggie first. She wasn't talking, just staring at her phone like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. I barely had time to ask before she looked up and whispered, "Aaron's been arrested." I blinked. What? For what? Her eyes filled with something I couldn't name, fear, disbelief, guilt. He killed his boyfriend, Brandon. The room spun a little. I sat down without meaning to. My brain rejected it outright, tried to frame it as a bad joke. But then someone handed me their phone. I don't remember who. All I remember is the headline, the photo. Aaron's face staring back at me from the screen, smiling that same rehearsed, hollow smile he always wore. Local man arrested in Grizzly. Murder of partner. Animal cruelty also alleged. The article said Aaron had returned home from visiting his parents. Brandon had been in the shower. Aaron saw a message on Brandon's phone from another man, and something inside him snapped. He waited. Let Brandon finish. Then he attacked. Multiple stab wounds. No sign of hesitation. The police found Brandon's body 2 days later, still, in the bathroom, already decomposing. Aaron hadn't run. He hadn't even tried to hide it. He stayed in the apartment, ate meals, slept in the bed, called out of work, claiming he had a stomach bug. Neighbors only called the police after a foul odor seeped into the hallways. When they broke the door down, they found him calm, sitting at the dining table. The parrot, Brandon's beloved pet, was also dead, strangled, left in its cage, neck, limp, just like Aaron had once joked about in the stockroom. It was all there, everything he'd said, everything we thought was just off-color humor or weird stress. It hadn't been a joke. It had been real, a confession hiding in plain sight. I thought back to every shift, every moment I'd felt uneasy around him, every sentence I'd brushed off as just Aaron being weird. All the times he muttered under his breath while tagging bras or staring too long at mannequins. I remembered how his face would go blank when no one was watching, as if he dropped the performance the second eyes were off him. How his hands worked mechanically, while his mind drifted somewhere much darker. And I remembered how we laughed, how we tried to ignore the red flags, because what were we supposed to do? Report someone for having a bad vibe? The guilt hit hard. I wasn't responsible, but I'd seen it. I'd felt it. Deep down, I'd known something wasn't right about Aaron. But like everyone else, I'd dismissed it. Retail isn't supposed to be dangerous. It's annoying, exhausting, underpaid, but not deadly. Yet Aaron had turned it into a mask, a place to blend in while the real him rotted just under the surface. In the following weeks, the store operated like normal, but the staff room was never the same. People avoided talking about him, as if silence could erase what had happened. A few of Us, me, Maggie, Teresa. We'd share glances now and then, that unspoken understanding. We'd all stood close to something evil. And none of us had seen it until it was too late. Aaron was sentenced quickly, 20 years without parole. The press called it tragic, senseless. Some of his friends from school claimed shock, said he was always smiling, a little intense, but harmless. I knew better, because monsters don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they work beside you, laugh at your jokes, ask for help lifting boxes, and when they smile, it feels just a little too sharp. I left that job not long after the truth came out. It wasn't because of the workload or the pay or even the store itself. It was what the place had come to represent. I couldn't stand in that stockroom without hearing Aaron's voice, that casual murmur about strangling a parrot, or imagining his hands, the same ones that sorted hangers and folded t-shirts, gripping a knife instead. Every corner of that building felt stained by the fact that we had laughed alongside someone capable of such cruelty, that we hadn't seen it sooner. When I moved to my university town, I tried to leave it all behind. New classes, new friends, a clean slate. But Aaron stayed with me in ways I didn't expect. Not as a nightmare or a ghost, but as a quiet, lingering lesson. One I still carry. Sometimes I think about how close I came to being alone with him. How easily the story could have ended with my name in the news instead of Brandon's. It doesn't matter that Aaron never laid a hand on me. What matters is that I ignored my gut, that instinctual discomfort I felt every time he stepped too close, every time he smiled too wide. I told myself I was overreacting, being judgmental, but I wasn't. I was sensing something I couldn't explain. Now when someone makes me feel uneasy, I don't brush it off. I listen, because evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it walks and talks just like anyone else, charming, clever, even likable. But you can feel it if you're paying attention. It's in the pause between sentences, the way someone watches a little too long, or how their smile doesn't quite match their eyes. I used to believe stories like this only happened to other people, strangers on the news, names I'd never know. But now I understand the truth. Sometimes the real horror is standing right beside you, tagging clothes and making small talk, and you don't realize how close you were to it until it's far too late. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.